Hello, it's Giles Whittell. It's the week ending Friday, the 11th of July. From The Observer, welcome to the news meeting. You might have seen that on Sunday The Observer published a major investigation into the best-selling memoir, The Salt Path. In the book, the author Raina Wynn recounts how she and her husband, Moth, set out to walk the southwest coast path after losing their home and receiving a devastating diagnosis. Moth had a rare degenerative neurological condition. But reporting by Chloe Hadjimatheou raises serious questions about some of the central claims in that story. The piece has caused quite a stir, and for good reason. Truth matters. So today, instead of our usual format, which is three journalists all coming to pitch their story, today's episode is a Salt Path special. We're going behind the scenes of the investigation, speaking directly with the journalists behind the story. I am joined, therefore, by News Meeting regular and Observer investigative reporter Chloe Hadjimatheou.
Hello.
And Alexi Mostrous, our investigations editor, who worked closely with Chloe on the piece.
Hi.
Now, Chloe, if you can bear it, for those who haven't been following the story, can you give a brief summary of what transpired?
Okay, so I would suggest if you're listening to this, just press pause on your phone or wherever device you're listening on, go and have a look at the article because it is pretty complicated and also it's quite a good read. And so I think you'll enjoy the episode more if you've got that. But in essence, what I found was three claims in the book needed investigating. One was the way in which they claimed to have been made homeless. They claimed it was because of an old friend of theirs that had essentially conned them out of their house. I found that all the way back in 2008, Raina Wynn, who was at that time known as Sally Walker in the small North Wales town where she lived, worked as a part-time bookkeeper in an estate agent's. And the estate agent, who was a man called Martin Hemmings, noticed that some cash hadn't been deposited by his bookkeeper in his account. He investigated. At first, he found that £9,000 or so was missing. And when they confronted Sally Walker about this, she made good. She found the money and paid it back.
Is that episode in the book?
No, none of this is in the book. And then what happened was, having let their part-time bookkeeper go, Martin Hemmings, who I should interject here, died back in 2012. So the person that I got this story from was his widow. It was a family business and she often helped out in the business, so she knew this very well. She knew Sally Walker very well. She recounts how her and her husband then went back through all the books, years and years and years. It took them months. And eventually they came up with a figure of how much they believed had been taken from their business, which was about £64,000. They went to the police. Sally Walker was arrested. She was questioned. Her house was searched. And the police then, having questioned her for the day, let her go and said to her, please come back tomorrow morning for us to continue our questioning. And she didn't. She went home and the next morning she took her car and she vanished. Raina Wynn, who was known back then as Sally Walker, in 2008 she was accused of embezzling money from her employer. She borrowed money to pay that missing money back, and that was put against her house. And when the Walkers couldn't repay that, their house was repossessed. I also found that when they said that they were destitute and had nowhere to go, and that's why they walked the Southwest Coastal Path, I found that actually in 2007, they bought a property in France, not far from Bordeaux. It's a property they still own today. And then finally, I wanted to understand Moth's illness because the books claim the illness is a very core element in the books. And each of the books claims that at the end of each of the walks in the three books, his condition is massively improved, essentially through walking. And so I wanted to understand that, and I spoke to neurologists who cast doubt on the ability of somebody to reverse the symptoms of this very tragic and fatal neurological condition.
And they indicated to you that at the very least this was a highly unusual case.
They said that they'd never come across anybody who had managed to reverse their symptoms in this way. They didn't believe that that was possible given the way that the brain is damaged by this disease.
the story was published late on Saturday night and in print on Sunday morning. Tell us a little bit about the reaction that you have seen to it.
I think it's safe to say we were pretty floored by the reaction. We had expected that it might cause a few ripples. I don't think we'd expected it to have quite the impact that it did. It seems to have really touched a nerve with the public, and it's had lots and lots of pickup all over, lots of people talking about it, loads of messages to me, people wanting to talk to me about it, our readers, and lots of people calling for interviews, that kind of thing.
Alexi, as the Observer's investigations editor, you were across this, as we say. You taking an interest from the start and serving as Chloe's editor. What made you realise that it was a big story?
So I think you start off from the position that this is a publishing phenomenon. This isn't just any book. For various reasons, whether it was because of a certain type of England that the authors were kind of bringing into reality, or whether it was because of this extraordinary tale of adversity, something caught the public imagination about the Salt Path, and it just sold and sold and sold. I think it was on the bestseller list for 80 plus weeks. So the two authors and their life, it's not just a typical story. It was a phenomenon. If the allegations that Chloe had been developing were less extreme and less important, in other words, if, for instance, there were aspects of the Salt Path that might have been, a little bit exaggerated or even a little bit untrue, then I think that A, we would have had pause in terms of whether or not we published it or followed it up, but B, it wouldn't have had the impact that it did. I think the reason why the story had such an impact was the fact that what Chloe found out was so shocking, and evidence of such apparent dishonesty that it coloured the entire book for a lot of people that had read it in good faith.
Have you been surprised by the impact of the story, nevertheless?
Yes, I have been surprised. I mean, it's been followed up pretty much in every publication in the UK, in dozens of other publications worldwide. There is something about this story that has really taken off.
As just readers reading an inspiring story, but also there's a cohort of readers who themselves, a small cohort, who themselves are sufferers of this or similar conditions, and their reactions have been kind of complex, shall we say?
Yeah, I've heard from a lot of people who either have had a member of their family who has this condition, so they've lived it by living with somebody with the condition, or I've been contacted by one man in particular who has a diagnosis, and most of them have been very confused by the Salt Path because they haven't been able to understand why they can't mimic this in some way, or their loved ones can't mimic this in some way, that they can't manage to walk in this way and improve their symptoms. Some have said that they were made to feel very guilty by the book. The man who... Because should they have done more? Should they have forced their relative to walk?
Oh, I see.
Why did I allow my mother to die from this? Why didn't I force her to try and walk the Southwest Coastal Path? This kind of thing. A man called John in Surrey who contacted me who has this condition, I think his email was the one that had the biggest impact on me. I found it really quite heartbreaking. He said, me and my wife read The Salt Path and we followed Moth's condition and it gave us real hope. And in essence, he said, your article has extinguished that hope and it's very difficult to live with that. It's been a real blow for us.
Let's take a step back. Tell us how the story came to you. How did you find the story?
I can't really say at this moment because I had a tip-off from somebody who's not decided to come forward yet. When and if this person does, then that's up to them. But I this often works this way. As a journalist, you get somebody contacting you saying, maybe you should look into this. And I have to say, I wondered whether this person had an axe to grind. These are very successful people. Rayner and Moth win. There are lots of reasons why people might want to take them down. So you always sort of treat something like this with a lot of suspicion. But what they did give me, which was really helpful right at the beginning, was the real names of Raina and Moth Wynne, because those names aren't in the public, Sally and Tim Walker. They don't seem to be anywhere. You can search as hard as you like, but there's no connection between the public figures and their real legal names.
What did you do with them? What was your first piece of digging?
So the thing that interested me the most was the way in which they lost their home. So I said, right, let's have a look at when the home was taken possession of and under what circumstances. So I called the land registry and got lots and lots of documents. And then I actually, complete mistake, I found the name of a property solicitor on one of the documents, and I Googled him and I called him up, Bryn Roberts, and he was incredibly kind and generous and explained the documents to me over the phone. Oh, that's an TR1 form. Oh, I haven't seen one of those for years. And so he sort of taught me through the documents. It then transpired I'd called the wrong guy. The guy on the form was somebody called Bryn Robertson, and I have no idea who he is. I never managed to get hold of him. The guy that I'd called by accident was incredibly helpful to me. And so he taught me through the documents. And
did you find out from those documents anything vitally important?
What I found was the contract that had been drawn up by the man that lent the money to the Walkers. He had provided the loan against their property. So when he gave them £100,000 to cover legal costs and pay back the Hemmings, he had put that as a loan against their house at quite sort of severe terms, 18% interest to be repaid on demand. And that was an incredibly unusual thing, to see somebody take essentially a private mortgage out on their house, owing this money to an individual. That immediately sparked my interest. I just thought something weird is going on here. So I started trying to find out who it was who had lent them the money, under what circumstances, and that really kicked it off.
Okay. Chloe and Alexi, thank you very much. We'll come back after a short break. Alexi, tell us about what you were concerned about when Chloe brought this story to you.
So I think I had a couple of questions that I wanted to talk through with her. The first was that what she was looking into wasn't a piece of journalism or reporting from a paper like the New York Times. It was a memoir. And I suppose in the very nature of a memoir, you're going to potentially find exaggerations. You're going to have the author of the memoir put themselves at the centre of the story. So one of the first questions that we were talking about was, how much truth could you actually expect? Should you actually expect from a memoir, even one described by Penguin as unflinchingly true? So there was quite a high bar, I think, in terms of what Chloe found out. If she had just found out, for instance, that there was a few mistakes or a few exaggerations, then I think we would have had a problem with the story. The great thing was that Chloe's reporting kind of uncovered such a level of apparent dishonesty, at least in how the story how Raina Wynn's story got started, that sort of we found it. We were quite comfortable making the decision that even for a memoir, that sort of misrepresentation was newsworthy and was in the public interest.
So, having made those calls, where did you decide to go next in terms of inquiries?
So I think the most difficult editorial subject that Chloe was dealing with was Moth's illness.
Right.
So she had the detailed presentation of Moth's CBD set out by Raina Wynne in these 3 books. And then she had the conversations that she was having with the neurologists and the experts, which cast doubt on some of those claims and some of those representations. But she very rightly and properly did not have access to any of Moth's medical records. Medical records are some of the most private documents that you could get. So what to do with that disparity became kind of a real thing that we talked a lot about. And we can get, I think, in later on to Raina's response to our characterization of Moth's illness, which actually shows that the couple definitely did not make up Moth's CBD or CBS diagnosis. I think that we'll get to that in a minute, but that doesn't mean that it's still not of public interest in how that illness was portrayed.
Chloe, a key part of the context for this is that the illness is a big part of the books. And so to that extent, it is already in the public domain. Is that right?
That's right. And actually, it's important to say that the very first act I did in this investigation was to contact Rayner and Moth and ask them for an interview. So the person who had come to me and said, what I have seen of them and Moth's illness and what is portrayed in the books, there are some inconsistencies there. They didn't have an inkling about the criminal allegations against Rayner or anything like that. Their concern was that what they had seen in person and what was in the books didn't quite match up. And so the first thing I did was contact them and say to them, look, we're interested in this sort of miraculous recovery that Moth has made through walking. Can we interview you about it? And I said to them, look, there is some skepticism within the neurological community about this. Can we discuss it? And I didn't get very far. So that was my starting point, though.
And Alexi, as to the distinction between the claims in Chloe's reporting of financial malpractice and the claims in the reporting about the illness, what is the public interest argument that we as journalists have to present in all reporting, but in this particular case, what is the public interest argument for highlighting the disparity, as you point out, between Moth's condition as described in the book and the likely condition of a normal sufferer of CBD?
I think there are two points to make to that. The first is that the couple have made something that would normally be very private into a public matter by discussing the illness and its progression very openly and publicly, not only in their books, but in dozens of interviews and in the eventual film that has just been released. So essentially a private matter has been turned by them into a public matter. But also there's another point, which is that, as Chloe has alluded to, a lot of sufferers of CBD and or CBS, which is the related condition, will have read The Salt Path and will have drawn either hope or other messages from it. So if that account is in fact in some ways inaccurate, then there's a public interest in trying to correct that record.
So, as you say, Chloe, the first thing you did on hearing about the story was approach Sally and Tim Walker to ask for an interview. They declined, but they did eventually provide an initial response. Am I right?
So I having then investigated and uncovered everything I did, I went back to them and said, look, guys, I've found some stuff that doesn't tally with what you've written in your book and what you've said publicly. Can we meet up and discuss it? I didn't get any kind of response. And after I waited a couple of days, I wrote to them again and I listed everything that I'd found and said, these are the things that I found. I'd love to know from you, what your take is on this. Do you think any of this is inaccurate? Can you provide any context for it? Again, would you like to meet and chat about it? And I got a response from their lawyers who said, we normally give people about a week, especially with something so complex and so many points putting to them. So we had offered them a week to sort of digest what we'd sent and respond. And they asked for more time. And we gave them as much as we possibly could, given the fact that we have a print paper that needs to go to the printers. And we did get a response from them. And what we got was a short statement.
In fact, I can read the key part of this statement. The lawyer said, "The Salt Path lays bare the physical and spiritual journey Moth and I shared, an experience that transformed us completely and altered the course of our lives. This is the true story of our journey." And we published that statement in your initial story.
We did. I mean, you need to go to somebody and ask them what their response is because, that's just interesting, isn't it? You make allegations against somebody. What do they say about them? What's their response? What do they... So, we published that statement. And I think looking back on it, I wonder whether they hadn't realised, just like we hadn't realised, how much interest there really would be in the story. And so, given the fact that over this week, the story seems to have grown and grown, and more and more and more people have been speaking about it, Raina Wynn has got a website, and on Wednesday evening, she published a much more detailed and extensive response to the allegations we'd made in our article.
And what were the key points in that response, Alexi?
It was 2,300 words, which is, I think, almost as long as the piece we wrote. She came back on with more details about how she said she lost her home, about why she changed her name and why her husband changed his name. But perhaps the most kind of controversial and most interesting bit of the statement for us was the statement relating to Moth's illness, because at the same time as she kind of tried to explain a little bit more background about Moth's illness and diagnosis, she also published letters from 3 doctors dating from 2015, 2019, and this year in 2025, where you could click on the letters and actually read them for yourselves.
And they showed in broad terms that he had been given a CBD diagnosis?
So I think I just want to sort of, for the record, distinguish between CBS and CBD, because there is some confusion. And in fact, in one of her responses, Raina Wynn conflates the two and says they are essentially the same thing. My understanding from neurologists is they are not. CBS is corticobasal syndrome. This is a set of ailments, a set of symptoms that patients exhibit. And they can have many, many causes. The most common is CBD, corticobasal degeneration. That's the most common reason why you would have CBS, these symptoms. But there are lots of other reasons why you may exhibit those symptoms, including much more common ailments like Alzheimer's. And so there may be lots and lots of causes of CBS. And it seems that Moth was given a diagnosis of CBS, although it was an atypical indolent version of this, which means that, and actually Raina Wynn does allude to this in her first book, in The Salt Path, when they first get the diagnosis, the consultant says to them, this seems to be quite slow progressing. That's what indolent means. In essence, it's not moving forward very fast. And it's atypical because it's not exhibiting the sort of rapid degeneration, I'm guessing, that most corticobasal degeneration is. There is a reference to corticobasal degeneration in one of these responses from the consultant, although again they're not sure. So they're sort of alluding to the fact that it could be this. And again, Raina does state this in her books, that it's very difficult to know whether corticobasal degeneration is actually the cause of the condition, and often patients won't know for sure until after they're dead and there's been an autopsy.
So I think we should say one thing about the statement published on Raina Wynn's website and the letters, the medical letters that she attached. So it seems to be clear from those medical letters that, at least from 2015, which is the date of the first letter, that it was reasonable for Moth, her husband, to believe that he had or might have CBS or CBD, as it's also as a related condition is known. So any sense that this couple might have just made up this diagnosis out of the blue, that's just not the case. There are still questions about how they presented the illness, but it's not the case that they just made it up.
Now, we should just repeat that this statement from Raina Wynn is available on her website. I think you can click through to it on the Observer website.
rainawynn.co.uk.
Yeah, and it states that she regards our reporting as, I think, vile, intrusive, and significantly misleading. But there are no specific allegations of factual error, but there is one that we owned up to. Is that correct?
Another thing that I found was that the couple had purchased a property in France, a couple of hours from Bordeaux, a house that I went and visited, and it's a complete ruin now. Not only is it uninhabitable, I didn't feel safe going in because the roof is about to collapse, but I am assured that actually when they bought the property, it was inhabitable. They say they haven't been and stayed there, and it's been a ruin for a very long time. Neighbours in the village told me that they had stayed there years ago in caravans on the land. We took a photo and some video of this, and in fact, what transpires is that there was a house which the Walkers owned, and next door to the house is a pigeonnier. I feel embarrassed about my
Pigeon
French.
loft?
A pigeon loft, a tall tower, quite picturesque, also a ruin now, and that is owned by Tim's brother, not by Tim and Sally Walker. And that pigeon loft is what we showed in our video and on our website, and that wasn't correct. Their house is actually about 15 metres away and hidden behind undergrowth.
So there are questions about how the illness was presented in the book. There are revelations that you have reported about financial dealings between Raina Wynne and the Hemmings. Why did it take this long, and did it fall to a newspaper to uncover this, and not the publisher of their books?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's one that we've sort of asked of, we went to Penguin and put all of this to them in exactly the same way as I went to Raina and Moth Wynne. I approached Penguin and offered to have a conversation with them and present my findings. They didn't want that. I then sent them an email with the list of allegations, and they did not respond to us at all. In fact, they did eventually publish a response after our article had come out, and that was in a industry magazine called The Bookseller, which is behind a paywall. So had their readers wanted to see the article or understand Penguin's response, they might have struggled. Essentially what that response said was, we feel that we did all the reasonable checks and balances. We took what was said in the book in good faith, and we don't think we did anything wrong.
I know that in the film world as well, some of the producers of the film have said we did reasonable due diligence. Does this point to a fundamental difference between the Fourth Estate, as we sometimes call ourselves, the press, right, and publishers and filmmakers in the way they regard reality, the respect that they accord to truth, and the obligation that they feel under to reflect it in what they put out?
I mean, I think it does raise these questions. It's not the first time these questions have been raised. I mean, there have been other memoirs that have been found to be inaccurate. The one that springs to mind is it James Frey? James Frey's book, A Million Little Pieces in America, and this was some years back. It was a book about a drug addict and his experiences as a drug addict, and I think he was found to have exaggerated quite significantly his experience. I think the difference with that and with this case is that in James Frey's case, he altered his own reality. It didn't really impact on anyone else. Whereas in this case, I think Ros Hemmings would argue that they sort of cancelled her reality in the way in which they told their story. Interesting that I spoke to Ros Hemmings and I actually asked her why she hadn't come forward with this. And she said, nobody asked me about it. I think lots of people in the Welsh town where the Walkers had lived had known about this. It was a whispered truth, but nobody really knew where do you go? Who do you speak to? How do you call Penguin? How do you call the filmmakers? It just, people just didn't know what to do with that. So they were waiting for somebody to come along and ask the right questions.
And I suppose we could imagine a world in which publishers of quote-unquote non-fiction assert a right to take more liberties than journalists do with the truth in the service of a great story. But does it make a difference that in this case, at least in some editions, as you were saying, Chloe, there's a very categorical statement at the front that this is a true story? I
mean, it's quite a sort of long disclaimer. And I read it. I I don't know the difference because I don't notice these things in memoirs, but somebody told me that this was quite unusual. I mean, it asserts that the author claims this is true. Some names and places have been changed to protect people. But apart from that, the author absolutely says this is true. Oh, and by the way, please don't take any of the medical stuff in the book as advice. Please go to your doctor. So there was a long sort of disclaimer at the front. I'm not sure whether it's reasonable for us to expect publishers to do journalistic research on every single person they publish, but I think maybe it's reasonable for them to ask for some evidence of what's being claimed in a book, particularly if the claims are quite big and miraculous, maybe.
Chloe, where do you go next with this?
I am digging in various avenues. I'm not ready to share yet what I'm looking at, but I can tell you I think there will be more to this story.
Okay. Chloe, Alexi, thank you very much.
The Observer.